Thanks for the introduction, Mike, and I have to use these now, unfortunately, sometimes. But I'd like to tell Mike, I guess he left, but I was thinking, Jack, that how could we work, trilogies work really well for aviation art, but I thought, well, how do you get past a trilogy? And I think maybe we could work on a prequel with Mike O'Neill, I don't know. But that could possibly be in the works. But this next talk is going to be distinguished by, can you hear me? Sorry. Yeah. Distinguished by two things. One is when I'm in front of a group, I'm usually talking about various problems with hemorrhaging, twin deliveries, things that probably this group doesn't really want to get into. So I feel a little more comfortable talking with subjects, but this has been a passion all my life. So this is an example of an amateur following a professor. So it's going to be very hard to follow that previous talk. But if anything, this might give hope to everyone out there that persevere, and you too can get up here and give a talk following who really knows what they're talking about. So I've been working on a book project for several years on the Eagle of Trieste, and the other thing that I try to do is find obscure topics, and that way I might look like I know what I'm doing. But I don't, and so therefore I have to enlist many people to help me, and that I actually will have to add a few more to this list before we move on. The book is still in process, but hopefully going to be ready in about 3 or 4 months. We're getting very close. One of the things that really pushed this along a little bit was I was able to meet the Baroness and communicate with her. She is the daughter of the person we're talking about today, and meet and discuss with many other experts in this field about Gottfried von Banfield, who is the Eagle of Trieste. And that's going to be the cover of the book as it comes out. And I'd like to give a quick mention to the painter who did the cover, Serge Stone, who is a Dutch artist and who unfortunately passed away shortly after completing that painting for my book. And some of you may recognize it was used as a cover of one of the OTF journals, I think about 2 years ago. But very nice painting by Serge, and it was very nice of him to do that for us. But Gottfried is a very interesting fellow. But before we get into it, I'd like to give a little background because we're not on the Western Front. And this map is by David Machin, who allowed me to use it. And what I want to point out, oops, wrong thing, there we go, is Trieste, Venice. Anyone want to guess how far that is? It's not very far. It's 72 miles. And Grado, which was an advanced base, was less than 50 kilometers from Trieste. And the other thing that, as I read or initially began, what I didn't quite grasp is the front line is right there, and there's Trieste. So it's very close to this base, and that will come into play as we talk about things. Birthplace of Geoffrey Thomas Banfield, who was an Irishman, was Castelnuovo. And Castelnuovo is in this old postcard. It's a small town on the edge of the harbor of Pola, which was the major base for the Austro-Hungarian naval forces at the time. And the reason an Irishman was born there was because his father, an Irishman, was a captain in the Navy and actually had a distinguished career in the Austro-Hungarian Navy. But the reason his father was there because his grandfather was there, who came over to instruct several members of the royal family in English. But I think they mostly came to escape England because they were Irish, and they could move along and move themselves better and advance themselves somewhere other than England, because in the Royal Navy, I don't think the Irish were going to go too far. But the person we're talking about here is Geoffrey Thomas. Now, Geoffrey Thomas is shown here as a graduating cadet from the Austro-Hungarian Naval Maritime Academy, but he's no longer Geoffrey Thomas. He's now Gottfried Banfield, because in order to attend the school, he had to become a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So he changed his citizenship from Irish or UK to Austrian. pay attention because that will change again. He has an interesting life ahead of him. He had a friend at the academy, and it's always good. I think I remember a talk that John Gutman gave where it was nice to have friends in high places. And he had a very good friend as he was going through the academy. His father was one of the principal admirals in the KUK, which is the Austro-Hungarian Navy. And his friend mentioned to his father that, I have this friend, Gottfried, and he really likes aviation. And so, lo and behold, he was able to get a transfer fairly quickly into the aviation arm of the Austro-Hungarian Navy, which was a really new part of things because it was really only getting started in 1910. I will say that this talk's going to go pretty quick because we're glancing over a lot of things, so we'll move along. But I thought somebody out there likes medals and pilot badges probably. And this is an example of the first pilot's badge for the Austro-Hungarian Navy. And it changed as of 1914 to a different one, so only 12 pilots qualified for this. So if you see this on eBay for about $30, it's probably not one of the original. They should go for a little more than that, but occasionally I see them for sale, and they're really quite a rare item. But so he earned his seaplane pilot's license and was selected to go to Paris because the Austro-Hungarian Navy wanted some airplanes, and at the time they weren't building their own. And they went to test a plane. This is an example of the Donné Levesque, and if my French is not good enough, please correct me, but the Donné Levesque?
Donné Levesque.
Donné Levesque, thank you. And this is an example of one of them in the Austro-Hungarian colors, markings. And you can see this very happy fellow sitting there. That's not Banfield, but we could pretend it's him. But anyway, draws a crowd. And this airplane is very critical to him because in 1913, the station that he was at was going to be visited by one of the crown princes. So he decided to do a flyby as the crown prince's boat came towards the harbor, show him what he could do. So he went out there, flew around the boat a little bit, did a maneuver or two, lost his engine, crashed into the sea, had to be rescued, had his right leg broken quite severely, and was then out for about a year's worth of recuperation, and had a very advanced orthopedic procedure for that time that I now know that Navy Lance was partly a recipient of that advancement because they actually put the bone back together. So maybe that emergency room should study Austro-Hungarian military medicine from 1913. But anyway, he was severely injured, broken leg, and the Crown Prince came to visit him in the hospital because he had been flying around his boat, showed concern, and again made a connection of Banfield with people in authority that will help him out as his career moves on. He, at that time, thought he wasn't going to get back to military aviation. He was recuperating. He was one of the very few seaplane qualified pilots in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there was a firm called Lohner that was beginning to build some seaplanes, and he started working with them as a test pilot, which also will be important to come back to a little bit later. There's a thread that keeps coming, connections that keep coming back. The Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Montenegro, and at the beginning of the war, the Austro-Hungarians were concerned about their southern flank, which is about here, and the French wanted to try to open up a front there, so they were sending a lot of ships to this harbor and were supplying military supplies to support activities up in here. So the Austro-Hungarian sent some seaplanes here. And this is the group that they sent to Qatar. Banfield, Rosasek, and Medjugorje I'm really bad at these names. Maglik, M-A-G-L.
Probably Magli.
Maglich. So these are the pilots. They have 3 seaplanes. They borrowed someone from the Army to be an observer. And you've got your collection of dogs and all the rest. And the uniforms look fairly, like, they didn't look very military to me. I don't know, but they're kind of relaxed. So they began the war with the Loner M series, which the Navy then called the E series. And one of the frustrations I have as you look through the Austro-Hungarian naval records is that every time the aircraft manufacturer decided to call an airplane a certain type, the Navy called it a different type, so then you have to figure out which they're talking about, and they don't keep any kind of consistent records. But anyway, so these are Loner M's, but they're considered the E series, if that makes sense. It was an 85 horsepower engine. Oops. And it's actually fairly neatly contained, and the next picture will show it too. And it was capable of about 90 kilometers an hour and could fly for about 4 hours. So they were used for observation primarily. Here's another picture of one of them, and it was not, the setup was fairly rustic, and they literally were pulling these planes in and out of the water by carts. But I thought of this picture as you see this fellow here smiling, shirt off in the water. It wasn't quite the Western Front, I don't know. The war's war, and I'm not saying it wasn't dangerous for these folks, but they seemed in a lot of pictures to be having a pretty good time on the Adriatic Sea. That lasted a short period of time, but some things were accomplished. This is by Robert Carr, and there was one time where they thought they saw a submarine. That's what this was showing, but for the most part, what their missions were and what they did was they went to that harbor where the French were coming in at the Bari. They were observing and actually began bombing, and actually flew night missions for the first time. So they were trying to do what they could with a relatively limited arsenal. But for Banfield, he sees his first enemy plane because the French put their Voisin there, and he came across this very aircraft in flight. They passed by each other because neither was armed, and nothing really happened except perhaps Banfield didn't like the fact that he couldn't go after this plane. He was then transferred to Trieste and was put in command of the seaplanes that were going to be there. The large base, as you see pictures, and there are a lot of pictures, there's an excellent book by Marty O'Connor with a lot of pictures in it, and he was based in this area here. This is where the seaplanes were based. Now again, if you remember back to the map, Trieste was very close to the front lines and not very far away from Venice, and so things started heating up pretty quickly for him. They also got a new aircraft. This is the L type, although it's actually, I think, the Loner T1 type. That's what the Loners called it, but the Austro-Hungarian Naval Empire decided to say L-47. It's a little bit larger, has a 145 horsepower engine, now can accomplish 110 kilometers per hour top speed, could carry 2 for 6 hours, and also they could put a machine gun on it right here. And this is a well-known photograph. I think most people recognize. This is Banfield. This fellow still seems to be unidentified, so if anyone can identify him for me, that'd be great. I kind of hope his last name was Strobel, because Strobel flew a lot of missions with Banfield, but that has not been confirmed, so I don't know that. But one of the things that became apparent is he was, as commander, a good leader. He was another fellow who led from the front. He would fly missions. He would also fly all sorts of missions. He's recorded for flying observation, bombing. He would also fly defensive missions against other airplanes. He was quite the busy fellow and quite aggressive. This fellow, Cano, is actually, if you remember, I mentioned that Banfield had gone to Paris before the war to buy these two French, or actually it ended up buying 4 of these seaplanes to bring back to start the KUK naval arm. And he was taught there how to fly that particular seaplane by this fellow, Queneau, who was a very famous pre-war French aviator. And he ends up coming down to Venice to head up a French contingent of seaplanes. So now he is in Venice opposite of Banfield, who is in Trieste. The inevitable results were that they were going to meet. Now this is the Franco-British aviation type. It's not associated necessarily with Queneau, but the reason I showed it is just to show you, here you have the side-by-side arrangement of the pilot and the observer, and again, a machine gun. So similar type of aircraft, similar type of armaments, and similar type of crew. Another fellow that we will meet a couple times is also part of this French Naval Aviation Unit in Venice, Jean Roulier. And the other thing I want to point out very quickly leading up to something is these very fast boats that the Italian Navy used in the Adriatic. And this gun right here is very important in the next story that's coming up. But these boats were used throughout the war, and they caused a lot of troubles with the KUK. And also, there are multiple pictures of these boats pulling back downed Austrian planes back to Venice as trophies. So these guys would get out there and have some fun as the planes were flying overhead. They'd be out there shooting at them with these guns, and it leads to all sorts of interesting dilemmas. So anyway, going to September 1st, 1915, there was let me get my glasses. There was an incident involving Queneau, who was Banfield's instructor, and Roulet, who I mentioned. There was a report of a submarine that was sunk in a minefield. So Queneau and Roulet were sent from Venice to investigate it, and Banfield was sent from Trieste to investigate it. And they met in the air. This is a painting by Daniel Bechenet from France, and it shows the number 10, which is seen here, and that was Rouleau's plane. This is actually at the advanced base at Grado. They met in the air, and Banfield claimed 3 victories. It turns out that he really never scored any victories, but in his mind he scored 3 victories. So the first plane that he met is not in this depiction, but it was flown by Queneau in number 2. It would be similar plane, but a white 2. And he had with him the Italian commander of the base, Gian Bernardini. And Queneau and Banfield made several passes each other. Ineffectively, Queneau comes back down to the base, in which case Rouleau comes up to take up the fight. Banfield is engaging Rouleau. Meantime, Queneau deposits the Italian commander because he was airsick, gets a volunteer as a new gunner, comes back up. Banfield chases away Rouleau, who goes back to base. Queneau comes up. They exchange gunfire somewhat ineffectively, really, but Queneau again turns back to base. Banfield thinks he shot down 3 planes and puts in credit for 3 planes. So not quite exactly what happened, but sort of you can see how it felt to Banfield. But anyway, that was one of his first engagements in combat with other aircraft. Joseph Mickel is a engineer designing seaplanes, and this is one of his designs, a Mickel G-type. And the reason we're showing this is, remember that Banfield was a test pilot for a little while? This was a new type. This is actually, if you look, a G2, but what Banfield flew was a G1. But so he was called back from the front lines to Pola to test fly this plane. And he was joined by one of his fellows, Ackermüller, who was again one of the pilots that, one of the first pilots in the Navy. And unfortunately they crashed and Ackermüller was killed in that crash. And Banfield really dismissed this plane, did not like it at all. However, Mikkel continued to design and improve it, and they built up to 9 of those, all slightly different, but I don't think that they've ever seen any operational sorties. But, so this is a fellow that basically Banfield knew very early on and has lost his first comrade. While they're testing that plane, he runs across this aircraft, which is a Loner M, but it was built pre-war for a air race that never happened, and so was put away. But you'll notice this engine here distinguishes it from all other Loner M types, and it's a Mercedes engine. So Banfield finds this, says, I'm going to convert this from a 2-seater to a 1-seater, and I'm going to add a machine gun. So the KUK Navy now designates this as the L-16, even though it's supposed to be an E-series Loner M aircraft, if that helps make anyone follow that. But so this is a very unique aircraft, and Banfield will put it to good use quite quickly. And this is just a profile of that aircraft. And one of the things that I have enjoyed, and I'm sure other people would, is the very colorful aircraft that Austro-Hungarian Navy had, and very, very unusual types. But this fellow, Andre Bourgeois, thank you. I'm just going to turn to you when I get a French name, Bourgeois. And he is seen here. And again, this is an FBA type seaplane. He would meet Banfield, and Banfield would force him to land in the sea. And Bourgeois' gunner was killed in that initial engagement, and his aircraft was damaged. But Bourgeois is trying to taxi back to Grado, which was not too far away, if you remember the map. And so Banfield makes a pass and destroys basically the engine, so now Bourgeois cannot carry on. And then Bourgeois leans over, remember where the machine gun was? And so starts shooting at Banfield. So Banfield makes another pass and basically dissuades him from continuing to shoot at him. And a Austro-Hungarian boat comes out to tow him in. This is his FBA. And so to the victor goes, you can see the French aircraft behind Banfield. He would host him to dinner, and because of his courage, Banfield arranged for a plane to fly over to the base and drop a message to let them know not only that he had survived, but of the courage of this fellow, which was somewhat in keeping with Banfield. So this was one of his early first victories. He was very aggressive. His L-16 stood out because it was very different from any other plane that was flying around. So the French knew of him. This is just a nice picture of him. I know his daughter says she doesn't know if he had a dog, but this looks like a nice companion for him. So there was a new French type, FBA, and if you remember Roulier, thank you very much. Roulier, from before, is now looking at getting his new FBA flying boat ready for a mission. And you can see the bomb here that's being loaded on. And he just a few days before this mission had written to his brother, and in the letter he mentioned that the Austrians have impressive results with their fighter seaplanes. One of them, named Banfield, shot down 3 planes. They, the new FBAs he's referring to, are fast, but climb slowly and don't turn very fast. Aerial combat seems to be problematic with this kind of plane. In front of an agile fighter, what would I do in this plane? I fear to think about that. Well, he was prophetic, as often these fellows are. And, oops, sorry. So in combat, only about a week or two after writing that letter, on the 6th of August, Banfield does down 2 of the new types of FDA flying boats. These are both recorded as being shot down. And in one of them, Roulier is killed. So Banfield was able to fight off 2 of the most modern French aircraft opposing him and disposed of them with fairly short order. Now again, the book I'm writing is fairly long. I'm trying to condense all of this into a short, so we're skipping a lot. One of the other things that comes into play in Banfield's career, because 30% of his confirmed victories are Capronis, are the Caproni bombers. And again, if you remember the map initially, Venice and that coast of Italy is not very far away from Trieste. And Trieste is sending their planes over to bomb Venice and bomb the front lines. So it's a very, very strategic target for the Italians to bomb and try to put out a commission. So they spend a certain amount of energy and effort at trying to neutralize Trieste. And in their Caproni bombers, which are very good aircraft for that time, they're often quite successful. They have good aircraft. They have crew that are very enthusiastic and talented. And the reason I point this out is you can see how they're putting missions on there. And in this case, it's Pola, but there'd probably be some Capronis with Trieste on there. I just don't have a picture of it. And they would often bomb at night. This is a painting by an Italian artist, Roberto Zanella, and you can tell it's Pola because of the old Roman Colosseum here. I think it's a good evocative image of what things might be like during a nighttime bombing raid. But again, Banfield in his L-16 has a fair amount of success. This is a Jim Dietz painting I think everyone's familiar with. And again, about 30% of his ultimate 9 victories were Caproni bombers. He then is allowed to test fly, again, the test pilot, and also probably being the most successful pilot on the Adriatic Sea right now. A new fighter, and you'll notice, again, I think a lot of people know the CC stands for the owner of a lot of aircraft industry at the time, Camillo Castiglione, and they personally sent the first example to him to test fly to see what he thought. This was designed by Ernst Heinkel, by the way. And he liked it, and so it gets into service, and they're given the serial numbers of A. So A12 was that first one we saw, and then it went up to about A, I think 36 or so. I can't remember, I'll have to look at my notes. But this is the plane that Banfield used, A24 a lot. And again, I'm not an expert on aircraft. I think Jack Harris could talk about whether this was actually a good design or not, but that's a very unique approach to trying to keep a biplane together. But it was used by again, Banfield successfully, and formed the backbone of the fighter planes that the Austro-Hungarian Navy had in the Adriatic for some time. I think everyone knows this fellow, Italian ace, Francesco Baracca, and his very famous insignia of the rampant stallion. One of the things that Banfield mentioned in his autobiography and several times in interviews is his very famous combat with Baracca on New Year's Day of 1917, where they went at it with each other for nearly an hour, and neither could gain an advantage, and they flew off waving to or saluting each other as they flew off. And Banfield said he knew it was Baracca because of that insignia. Now, unfortunately, that probably never happened, because the insignia that he began to use was well after that time and was not applied to any of Baraka's aircraft before that. So I think that was a little bit of inventive, but it makes a good story. And it also allowed Bill Marsacco, who was an American artist, to put up a nice painting of the supposed incident. So at this point, you have a fellow who has been successful. He's, I think, fairly clearly a handsome young man. He's connected with powers that be, and his career is meteoric and going only one direction and very positively. So at this time, Mikkel, who again was the designer of these other aircraft, designed an aircraft specifically for von Bonfield. I'm sorry, Bonfield at this point, not von Bonfield, Bonfield. And it was a Type H, Ophage Type H, and became known as A11, but became known by Bonfield as my Bluebird or my Blue Wonder. And he liked to fly it at night. So his idea was to paint it a pale blue color because it would be tough to see either at night because it blended into the night, or over the sea it might blend in. So he thought that was a very effective camouflage. It's the only type of plane built. This was the only example of that plane that was built. So unlike von Richthofen, who had to fly the same planes as other people, Bonfield had his own special airplanes. And here's a photo of the Blue Wonder before it became the Blue Wonder, because it has white A11. After it was painted blue, those were black. And one of the, again, things that he liked to do is he liked to fly this plane at night. He thought this was a very excellent plane. And again, as I mentioned, a lot of times the Italians were coming over at night, so he did a lot of night flying. And he claimed on May 31st, the first night victory at 2,300 hours. And this is a new painting by Robert Carr for the book, showing the Blue Wonder taking down a Italian seaplane. It was debated whether this was actually should be a confirmed victory or not, and in the final listing it is not a confirmed victory. However, I found some evidence that shows the Italians did actually have to go retrieve a plane early that next day. So I'm pretty sure he did score this as a victory. So again, now he's got his own special plane. He's successful, and so he is appropriately rewarded, and he becomes a knight of the realm. And if you look here, you will see that he earned the Austro-Hungarian's highest award, and this is the Military Order of Maria Theresa. And what's interesting about this medal is that prior to the war, it was given only to members of nobility or commanders for battle victories, basically. And during the war, the emperor died and his son took over. And when his son took over, he specifically wanted to create a special a Knights section, or I guess Knights Award of the Maria Theresa. And that's what von Bonfield earned. And when you earn that, you become part of the nobility, so now he is von Bonfield. But it was especially created for the First World War, this subcategory, if you will, the Knights Order. Again, skipping ahead, later on in the beginning of the 1918, this fellow brought trouble to town, Perozzi, and he brought it in the form of two other fellows with him, Cavello and Martinengo, all of whom became naval aces, and they really started doing a number on von Bonfield's squadron, and were quite successful and started actually taking over air supremacy of the northern Adriatic Sea, which had belonged, I think, to the pilots at Trieste and von Bonfield up to that point. Last couple points. So this is von Bonfield in a captured Newport, and this is von Bonfield later in his life in an F-14 Tomcat. And I'm trying to imagine how someone can go from that airplane to the next in one lifetime, what he must have been thinking when he was sitting in that cockpit. Just an incredible feeling, I'm sure. One of the things in my research is I think that von Bonfield has always maintained a gentleman. He was an educated man. He is a very impressive fellow. After the war, the Italians took over Trieste and put him in jail for about 40 or 50 days because he was the enemy. And he then tried to go back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was disintegrating, and really couldn't find employment or anything worthwhile. So he ended up going back to Scotland, actually. And while in Scotland, was employed with a firm that was in charge of salvaging or trying to salvage the German fleet that had been scuttled at Scapa Flow. And he also, again, I didn't have time to go into it too much, but he met and courted and dated a woman in Trieste at the time, the Countess Tripkovich. And so she came to England and they were married. But she wanted to go back. Her father, he was a very wealthy man, and so he arranged for them to come back, provided that von Bonfield take Italian citizenship. So von Bonfield now became, instead of Jeffrey or Gottfried, he's now Goffredo, and he's now an Italian citizen. And he went back and worked in the shipping company that his father-in-law owned, and actually developed a division of recovery, and was very successful. During World War II, he actually was responsible for bringing up several Italian warships that had been sunk. And at the end of World War II, he, as probably you're well aware, as the German army was retreating, they were destroying everything as they retreated so that the Allies could not use it. In Trieste, he convinced the German commander there not to destroy the port facilities because of his war record of World War I. And so Trieste, the port, survived and was able to be a very significant factor right from the get-go after World War II. So the people of Trieste really respected him for that, and he then carried the title of Il Barone, or our Baron. He couldn't do no wrong amongst the people of Trieste. And in the 1950s, his company was hired by the French to help recover ships out of the Suez Canal. And for that, he received the Legion of Honor from de Gaulle himself, and was made the honorary consul for France in Trieste. So the fellow was really quite the example of a European man. But he always loved the sea. As I mentioned, he was born in Casanueva. He was in the Navy. He sailed all his life. And I just think this is a nice portrait of the elderly gentleman on his boat, doing what he always loved. And one of the things that he said was he doesn't feel like his life was really defined by his time in the First World War. It was, after all, only 4 years of a very long, distinguished life. But whenever he was given a task, he wanted to do it as well as he could. And I think he did his task very well. Now, in reference there, in my research, I did come across another legendary person of the Adriatic Naval Air War. And even though it was a brief time, somewhat romantic in time, perhaps, it seems like the war didn't end for some of the pilots. There's a new legend that followed. This fellow is an Italian fighter ace, apparently, named Porco Rosso. And I don't know if anyone's seen that animated film, but it is actually quite good, and it's quite a lot of fun. But, yeah. And so with that, we'll say goodbye for this brief encounter to the Eagle of Trieste.